I moved into the neighborhood in early October, just as the leaves were turning, painting the streets in a mix of red and gold. The houses were older, mostly from the 1960s, set on narrow lots with overgrown lawns that leaned toward neglect rather than care. My street ran in a gentle curve, and the houses on the inside of the bend had front yards shaded by big maples that left the sidewalks littered with brittle leaves. The air had that crisp, almost metallic smell of autumn rain, and the quietness of the street made the occasional sound, tires on wet asphalt, the distant bark of a dog, feel unusually sharp. I had rented the house because of its cheap price and proximity to work, but I quickly realized that the quiet carried its own weight. On the first night, I noticed the pattern immediately. At precisely 2:13 a.m., a single light in the house across the street would flick on for exactly 15 minutes. It never varied. Sometimes it was the upstairs bedroom, sometimes the kitchen. I didn't know who lived there. The blinds were always drawn, so I could only see the dim glow through the fabric. I tried to shrug it off as a neighbor staying up late, a habit I hadn't noticed in the brief walkthrough. But over the next week, the light became part of my night, a steady marker in the otherwise still hours. I also noticed movement that didn't make sense. Shadows would stretch across the curtains when I was sitting in the living room, not from my own lights but from something outside. A figure might linger near the edge of a yard, just out of view. At first, I assumed it was someone walking their dog or a passerby, but it happened at times when the street was empty, when no one else should have been out. It wasn't sudden or aggressive. It was the slow, deliberate kind of observation that made the air feel thick. I never saw anyone up close, but the feeling of being watched started to press on me during the day, too, when the sun was high and the street looked innocuous. I started paying attention to small details in the neighborhood. One house had a door that would occasionally swing open even when the owner was presumably out. Another had faint, but consistent, scratches along the side fence. Trash bins sometimes shifted overnight as if nudged, but the wind was rarely strong enough for it. Even the dogs had patterns, barking that didn't respond to anything, just bursts of noise from empty yards. The street had the kind of emptiness that makes minor disturbances seem louder. Every creak, every scraping, every low murmur of the wind felt magnified. One evening, I decided to take a walk after work. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights were just beginning to buzz faintly to life. The quiet that had seemed pleasant during the day now felt heavy. I walked slowly, noticing the way every hedge and tree cast long, angular shadows across the pavement. The house with the recurring light was dark that evening. I paused at the edge of its lawn, trying to see through the thick blinds. The street was empty, the air still. Then, a door creaked somewhere further down the curve of the street, a sound that seemed disproportionately loud. I glanced over my shoulder and caught a figure standing across the road, frozen in place. It was impossible to tell any features. It was too dark. The figure didn't move, and for a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it. I walked on, my pace quickening despite myself. When I looked back after a few houses, it was gone. That night, I slept with all the lights on, a habit I hadn't had since I moved out of my parents' house years ago. I kept thinking about the figure, but I couldn't place it. There were no signs of intrusion, no footprints in the yard, no disturbances beyond the shadows and movements I had begun to notice. In the days that followed, the sense of being observed intensified. I started locking windows twice, checking doors repeatedly, and paying attention to small noises, the rustle of leaves that shouldn't move, a car engine turning over a few houses down and idling for no reason, the faint scrape of metal against pavement. Every evening, the light in the same house flicked on at 2:13 a.m., unwavering. A week later, I was awake in the middle of the night again, staring at the curtain in my bedroom. A shadow passed quickly across the fabric. It was fast, deliberate, and it felt close. My heart jumped. I didn't go to the window immediately. Instead, I waited, watching for any other sign. Then I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps, slow and cautious, coming from the direction of the house across the street. They stopped abruptly, and I held my breath. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved again, this time receding. I lay in bed, listening to the rhythm fade into silence, knowing someone had been right outside, watching. I called the landlord in the morning. I didn't ask if anyone lived in that particular house. I just mentioned the light and the odd movements. He sounded mildly dismissive and suggested that older houses have wiring quirks, old wiring that could make lights flicker, that maybe the neighborhood had a history of pranksters, kids sneaking around. His explanation did little to settle the unease that had nested inside me. I started taking different routes home from work, avoiding the curve where the light appeared. I thought about installing cameras, but the thought of someone actively watching while I slept made even that intrusive measure feel inadequate. The final night came without fanfare. I had resigned myself to leaving the neighborhood, moving somewhere that didn't carry this weight. I was packing in the living room, boxes stacked, lights on, and the air smelled faintly of damp cardboard. Around 2 a.m., the familiar glow lit the curtain across the street. I sat very still, staring. Then the shadow appeared, not a fleeting brush but a full outline, standing at the edge of the lawn, watching. I felt a cold sweat run down my back. I grabbed my phone and left it on record in the window. I didn't sleep that night. At 2:15, I saw movement at my front door, the kind of slow, careful movement that makes the skin prickle. The shadow never left the yard of the house across the street, but someone, or something, had walked up to my door and lingered just outside. I left at first light, driving out of the neighborhood without looking back. I didn't return for the boxes or the keys. Later, I reviewed the video. Nothing appeared on it beyond the darkness and the light flickering in the house across the street. No figure, no footprints, no disturbance. Yet I knew it had happened. It was the way the neighborhood had allowed the feeling to build, the slow tightening of pressure, the quiet isolation between houses. The street never changed. The trees remained the same. The wind still rustled the leaves, but the memory stayed, a persistent weight, a reminder that quiet streets and empty yards do not always mean safety. I realized later that the horror of that neighborhood wasn't in a single act or figure. It was the consistent, subtle, and deliberate observation, the accumulation of small disturbances that told me someone had been studying every movement, every routine. It wasn't dramatic. There were no signs of forced entry, no confrontations. It was just being seen, unavoidably, every night, and the knowledge that leaving was the only way to reclaim peace. Even now, when I think of it, the memory of the shadows and the light flicking on at 2:13 a.m. makes my chest tighten. A quiet horror built from patience and persistence rather than sudden terror. I moved into the neighborhood because rent was cheap and my job transferred me with barely 2 weeks' notice. I did not have time to be picky. The place was a late 90s development on the edge of a medium city, the kind built fast when land was cheaper and expectations were low. Every street curved in the same soft way. Every house had the same bones. Beige siding, vinyl shutters, 2-car garages that swallowed sound. The lawns were thin and tired, edged with gravel where grass never quite took. It felt paused, like a place designed to be passed through, not lived in. My house sat on the inside of a bend. From my front window, I could see 6 others without moving my head. Across the street, directly in front of me, was a house that matched mine down to the roof pitch. The only difference was the porch light. Stayed on. A white bulb, bright enough to bleach the siding under it. It never flickered. It never dimmed. It stayed on in rain and heat and wind. The first night I noticed it because I was still unpacking. The sun went down fast, the way it does when the air cools early. One by one, porch lights on my street went dark. Timers clicked off. Motion sensors went quiet. The house across from me stayed lit. I assumed someone forgot. I went back to my boxes. The second night, it was on again. I paid more attention then. I had left for work before sunrise and came back late. When I pulled in, the light was already on. It came on before sunset, which stood out because most houses waited until it was fully dark. It was not warm like the others. It was white, almost clinical. Over the next week, I noticed patterns. I did not try to. They forced themselves into place. The light always came on before the sky lost color. Even when the house looked empty, no cars in the driveway, no lights inside. curtains drawn tight. The porch light still burned. Cars slowed near that house more than anywhere else. Not braking hard, not stopping, just easing off for a second. It happened often enough that I stopped ignoring it. Delivery vans, rideshare cars, random sedans. They slowed near that porch and then continued. Packages left on my porch would sometimes be shifted a few inches overnight. Not opened, not damaged, just moved. The mat would be nudged. A box corner would face a different direction. It only happened on nights when the porch light across the street looked brighter than usual, though I never saw it change. It was always bright. Some nights it felt harsher, like the air around it was cleaner. I started checking my camera app. I had a cheap door camera left by the previous tenant. It recorded motion, saved clips, caught raccoons, cats, wind. On the nights my packages moved, there was nothing. No clip, no alert. The camera faced the street. The porch light across the way blew out the exposure. The image was always washed in white. I began to notice the neighbors. I passed them while taking trash out or checking mail. They nodded. They waved sometimes. They kept moving. None of them looked at the house across from me. Not once. Their eyes skipped over it like it was a blank spot. When they stood outside, they faced other directions. When they worked in their yards, their backs were turned. At night, I sat by my window and watched. I told myself it was curiosity. Felt more like duty. The street was quiet. No music. No barking. The light stayed on. Moths gathered around it, then fell away. The porch itself was clean. No chairs. No decor. No sign anyone used it. One evening, I noticed the light come on early even though a car was parked in the driveway. I watched through the blinds as the sun still hung above the trees. The light clicked on without ceremony. The car never moved. No one came out. No one went in. I checked property records online. The house was owned by a local holding company. The same company owned two others in the development. Those other houses were normal. Their lights behaved. Their driveways saw use. This one did not. The longer I lived there, the more the street felt arranged around that house. Like it was a fixed point and everything else adjusted. When a storm knocked out power for half an hour, every light went out except that porch. It stayed on, clean and steady, while the rest of the street sat dark. I stopped leaving packages outside. I had them held at the depot. I stopped parking on the street. I stopped walking at night. Still, the light watched. One morning, I woke to find my trash can tipped over. Trash scattered. It was the only one. The others stood upright. The porch light across the street was still on, even in full daylight, faint but present. I called the property management company for my rental and asked about the house. They told me it was not their concern. They suggested I talk to the city. The city redirected me. No one answered. Records showed nothing unusual. I began to see small changes in my own behavior. I timed my exits to avoid being outside when the light was on. I kept my blinds angled. I slept poorly. The house never did anything. That was the problem. It was always there, always on, always ignored. One afternoon, I noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt along the curb in front of that house. They stopped and then pulled away. No delivery was logged. No car stayed. The porch light was on. I finally did what I should have done earlier. I walked across the street in the middle of the day. The light was still on. Up close, the bulb was industrial. The fixture was newer than the house. The wiring ran into the siding through a sealed hole. The door was solid. No mail slot. No doorbell. The windows were blocked from the inside with white panels. Not boards. Panels cut to size, clean edges, tight fit. I circled the house. The yard was dead but maintained. Grass trimmed. No weeds. The back door matched the front. No handle. Just a blank slab with hinges. I went home and sat down. My phone buzzed with a notification from the camera. Motion detected. I opened the clip. The street was empty. The porch light across the way filled the frame. The timestamp showed midday. That night, the light was brighter. I could feel it through the walls. I checked my front door. A small package sat there. I had not ordered anything. It was addressed to me. The label was printed clean. No return address. The box had been turned so the label faced the street. I did not open it. I left it there. In the morning, it was gone. The next day, a truck came. No logo. Parked in front of the house with the light. 2 men got out. They wore plain clothes. They moved fast. They carried equipment cases. They went inside through the garage, which opened for the first time I had seen. The porch light stayed on. An hour later, the truck left. The garage closed. The light remained. That night, every porch light on the street turned on at the same time. Warm bulbs, soft glow, all except the one across from me, which stayed white. Then, one by one, the others turned off. The house across from me was last. The next morning, the light was off. It stayed off the following night. And the next. The street felt lighter. Cars stopped slowing. Neighbors looked forward again. I slept through the night. A week later, a for sale sign appeared in front of the house. The light stayed off. The panels were gone from the windows. The door had a handle now. It looked like any other place. I found a folded paper under my door that day. No envelope, no note, just a printed notice from the city about a resolved zoning issue related to unregistered monitoring equipment. It listed an address, the house across from me. I understood then. The light was not a warning. It was a marker. The house had been used as a quiet observation point. Traffic monitoring, license plate capture, package movement tracking, a test site hidden in plain sight. The neighbors knew enough to look away, not fear. Compliance. I stayed another month. The house sold. Family moved in. The porch light behaved like the others. I moved out when my lease ended. Cheap rent is never free. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. I had moved into my small suburban neighborhood in early autumn of 2019, drawn by the quiet streets and the promise of a simple life after years of city chaos. My house was modest, a 2-story brick with a small fenced backyard, enough to grow a few plants and have a quiet place for coffee in the mornings. Across the street, a man lived alone in a house that had clearly seen better days. I only saw him occasionally, usually tending to his overgrown lawn or taking his trash cans to the curb. There was nothing remarkable about him at first, just another neighbor. I first noticed something odd when I started finding small things out of place. A garden gnome I had left near the porch would be moved a few inches, or my recycling bins, which I always lined up neatly, would be slightly askew. At first, I told myself it was the wind or that I had done it and forgotten. But the changes became consistent. One morning, I found footprints in the thin layer of frost that covered my driveway. Footprints too narrow to belong to me, leading up to my front door and then away into the neighbor's yard. They were not large, not aggressive, just quiet and deliberate. I felt a chill that day but brushed it off, thinking it was some kid from down the street playing pranks. Over the following weeks, I became aware of sounds at odd hours. The soft scrape of shoes against concrete late at night, the low thud of something heavy being set down outside. I never saw anyone directly, but the noises always came from the direction of his house. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps he worked nights and had just returned, or maybe he was fixing something. But then the pattern grew stranger. Lights would turn on and off in his house at odd hours, not the typical pattern of someone going about daily life. Sometimes the glow from his windows would suddenly vanish for a long stretch, only to flare again briefly, as if someone were watching or checking for something. I started leaving my blinds slightly open, trying to catch a glimpse of him, though I felt guilty for doing so. What I saw unsettled me. He didn't move around like someone performing normal tasks. He would appear in different rooms, standing very still, sometimes peering toward my house. I could never be sure, but the feeling of being watched became unbearable. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me, following my movements. I began to lock doors and windows more carefully, though nothing had happened yet. Then one night, I came home after a late shift. It was early November, and the streets were slick with rain, reflecting the pale streetlights. I pulled into my driveway, but something made me pause. My front door was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it unlocked. Heart hammering, I approached slowly, keeping my hands visible in case someone was inside. Nothing appeared out of place at first, but then I noticed subtle changes. My shoes were lined up differently, a chair pulled out slightly, and on the kitchen counter, a small stack of my mail had been shifted. It was precise, deliberate, like someone had been studying my habits. The next morning, I considered calling the police, but I had no proof of intrusion. I only felt the suffocating presence of someone monitoring me. My neighbor's house appeared normal from the outside, silent and inert, giving no hint of the strange life that seemed to pulse within. I began recording small things with my phone, logging times when lights went on, when noises occurred, and when I noticed items moved in my home. The pattern was relentless. Almost every night, around the same time, he would appear, sometimes visible from the corner of a window, sometimes only suggested by movement or sound. I tried to change my routine, leaving for work at different times, staying in different rooms, even sleeping in a spare bedroom, but it followed me. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of him in the backyard. I had gone outside to hang laundry. The air was crisp, the scent of wet leaves heavy, and the sun low, casting long shadows across the yards. I saw him standing just beyond the fence, motionless, staring directly at me. I froze, unsure whether to move or retreat. He didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. Then, after what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, he turned and walked back into his house. The fence blocked my view, but I could see the curtain fall back into place. From that point, I knew it wasn't random. This man had been studying me, tracking me, observing the minutiae of my life. I felt trapped in my own home, the sanctuary I had sought now compromised. I started to notice subtle signs of preparation in my own behavior. I left lights on in certain rooms, tried to vary my schedule more, even avoided certain windows. But every night, something reminded me that I was being watched. It escalated when I began finding small objects outside my house. Pebbles arranged in unusual patterns on the driveway, twigs piled near the back door. The final straw came one cold evening in late December. I returned from a grocery run to find my back door slightly open, and on the porch, a small pile of dirt arranged in a neat line pointing toward my front door. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground damp and sticky. The detail was horrifying, the care in which it had been placed, the deliberate nature of the act. It was no longer a passive observation. It was a message, a claim. I spent that night awake, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound from his house. Around 3 in the morning, I heard him moving outside, not hurried, but deliberate, pacing near the edges of my property. My fear was sharp, but it was accompanied by a strange clarity. I realized that this had been happening for months, slowly building, each small act testing my boundaries. I made a plan. I left a note taped to my front door for the police, documenting the disturbances, photographs of the footprints, and small arrangements outside. I also set up cameras inside the windows. The next day, a police officer came by after reviewing the evidence. They confirmed that the patterns I described were unusual, and while they couldn't immediately charge him with anything without catching him in the act, they warned me to be vigilant. That night, I waited in my living room, lights on, cameras rolling. Around the same time as before, I saw him again, emerging from behind his house, creeping along the fence line. This time, I called the police while keeping the line open, and within minutes, a squad car arrived. He was confronted outside my property. He didn't resist, didn't argue. They took him in for questioning. Later, I learned he had a history of stalking and voyeurism in other neighborhoods, moving quietly to avoid detection, and he had chosen my house as his focus. After he was arrested, I finally felt safe again. The weight that had pressed down on me for months lifted, though it left a permanent mark. I changed the locks, reinforced my windows, and even added motion lights around the property. My neighbor's house remains empty now, the shutters closed, a reminder of the months I spent under watchful eyes. I can walk outside without fear, but I still notice small things. A misplaced leaf, a shadow that seems longer than it should be, and a part of me flinches. I understand now how carefully obsession can creep into everyday life, how ordinary streets and quiet homes can conceal something deeply unsettling. I learned the value of vigilance, of documenting the subtle signs, and most importantly, of trusting my instincts when something feels off. The experience left me wary, but it also left me with a clear, undeniable truth. Sometimes horror isn't in the extraordinary. It's in the neighbor who watches you while you think you are alone. The ordeal ended, but it was thorough, immersive, and real. Every small displacement of objects, every subtle sound, every shift in light and shadow was a part of the methodical pressure he placed on my life. Nothing supernatural, nothing imagined, just pure, calculated human behavior. And that made it, to me, far more terrifying. I was 14 when we started spending time in the alley behind our block. It ran straight and narrow between two rows of old wooden fences that leaned in different directions, patched with scrap boards and rusted wire. Blackberry bushes grew through every gap. They pushed under fence slats and spilled onto the gravel no matter how often the city crews came through with cutters. The alley always smelled damp and sweet, like crushed leaves and rot. It felt hidden in a way the rest of the neighborhood did not. We went there because there was nowhere else to go. The park lights shut off early. The street had traffic. The alley had shade during the day and privacy at night. We sat on overturned crates, threw rocks at bottle caps, kicked cans, made noise. It felt like a place that belonged to us. An older neighbor once saw us heading back there late and made it clear we should not be there after dark. He did not give a reason. He only made it clear that the alley did not respond well to noise. The way he said it stuck with me because it sounded less like a rule and more like a warning. At first, nothing happened. The alley felt the same as always. The fences creaked when the wind pushed them. Rats ran through the bushes. Cats watched from the tops of trash bins. We kept going back. Then small things started. We threw rocks at the fence on one side, and a moment later a rock came back. It hit the ground near our feet. We laughed and blamed each other. We tipped a trash can over and ran. The next morning, every can in the alley stood upright except the one nearest where we had been sitting. It lay on its side, lit off, trash scattered like it had been shaken. The sounds came next. When we walked, something walked with us on the other side of the fence. The pacing matched our speed. When we stopped, it stopped. When we ran a few steps, it rushed to keep up. It was too heavy for a dog. The ground shook under the weight. The sound stayed low, close to the dirt, like something moving on all fours but with mass behind it. We tested it without meaning to. We split up, two on each side of the alley. The sound followed the larger group. When one of us lagged behind, the sound slowed. It never crossed over. It stayed hidden behind the fence line and the blackberry thorns. The alley had motion lights mounted high on the poles. They were old but bright. At first, they snapped on whenever something moved. When the sound started following us, the lights would trigger ahead of us, lighting up the path. The sound stayed just outside the light. Then, after a few nights, the lights stopped reacting. We waved our arms and jumped. Nothing. The bulbs stayed dark until we passed, then flickered on behind us like they were late. We told ourselves it was broken wiring. That was easier than admitting the timing felt wrong. The pacing grew closer. We could hear breathing through the fence slats, wet and steady. We smelled it before we saw anything. A thick, animal smell mixed with garbage. The bushes shook when it moved through them, branches snapping low to the ground. One night, a fence board cracked. A dark shape pressed against the gap. I saw bristled hair and a flat, blunt shape that moved away as soon as I focused on it. The sound retreated fast, tearing through the brush. We stopped throwing rocks after that. We tried to be quiet. That seemed to make it worse. When we whispered, the pacing stayed closer. When we laughed, it pulled back but stayed with us. Noise drew it out. Silence kept it near. The alley changed. We noticed gouges in the dirt, deep and uneven. The blackberry bushes were crushed in places, flattened into the mud. Trash bags ripped open from below, not torn from the top. Once, we found a dead cat near the fence line, body untouched except for the middle, crushed inward. No bite marks, just pressure. We started leaving earlier. We told ourselves it was getting cold. We told ourselves school mattered more. Still, some nights we felt drawn back, like we needed to see if it was still there. The motion lights stopped working entirely along one stretch of the alley. The city did not fix them. The darkness there felt thicker. Sound carried differently. The pacing always happened in that dark stretch. One night we stayed too long. The sound stayed with us the entire time, closer than before. The fence rattled as it moved. The bushes shook hard enough to rain leaves onto the gravel. Something hit the fence from the inside once, then again. The wood bowed outward. We ran. The sound surged alongside us, faster than before. The ground shook with each step. The lights did not come on. The darkness stayed ahead of us, then swallowed us, then fell away as we burst onto the street. The sound stopped at the edge of the alley. It did not follow. The next morning, the city blocked the alley. Yellow tape, a posted notice about animal control activity. Trucks were parked near the far end. Men in thick gloves and boots moved slowly, scanning the brush. Later that week, the alley was cleared. The blackberry bushes were cut down to the roots. Sections of fence were removed. The motion lights were replaced. An article ran in the local paper. It was small, buried near the back. It mentioned an illegal livestock situation discovered behind residential properties. A large feral hog had been kept and fed in the alley by someone using the space as a hidden pen. The animal had escaped its enclosure months earlier and had been living wild between the fences, surviving on trash and whatever it could catch. Hogs were intelligent, the article said. They learned patterns. They responded to sound. They avoided light once they understood it. The animal was captured after it charged a fence during the night. It was euthanized on sight due to size and aggression. I walked past the alley years later. It looked smaller, cleaner. The fences were new. The bushes had not grown back yet. The motion lights worked. It felt empty. What stayed with me was not fear of the dark or the alley itself. It was the memory of something learning us. Learning when we were loud. Learning when we were quiet. Learning how to stay just out of sight. I moved into the neighborhood in late spring, a few weeks after graduating college, hoping for a quiet place to settle while I started my first job. The street was suburban but older, lined with maple and oak trees whose roots had cracked the sidewalks. Houses were spaced closer than I liked, but the lawns were well kept and the driveways mostly empty during the day. I didn't know my neighbors, but everyone waved politely when I took the garbage bins out or carried groceries. The neighborhood felt normal, quiet, the kind of place where life moved in predictable rhythms. That comfort made what followed feel more surreal. The first odd thing I noticed was Mr. K, who lived 2 doors down. He was older, probably in his 70s, with a stooped frame and thinning hair. His house was always tidy. The grass cut, the flower beds edged with precision, and the cars washed weekly. At first, I thought he was just meticulous, maybe lonely, because he spent hours outside tending to his garden even on weekdays. But then I started noticing small details. His blinds were always slightly open, just enough to see a sliver of the interior. Sometimes, when I passed his window, I could see him moving slowly from room to room, pausing, watching, almost like he was counting or checking something. It began gradually. I would come home from work in the evenings and notice his lights flicking on in sequence. First the living room, then the kitchen, then the hallway, always in the same order. It never followed normal human patterns. It wasn't a mistake of timing, because the duration between the lights switching never varied. I told myself it was coincidence at first. People develop habits, I reasoned. But one night, returning later than usual, I watched from my car as all the lights went out in his house, leaving it completely dark. Then, within seconds, one upstairs window flicked on. A figure, though faint and small from the street, moved past the sill. It was too precise to be ordinary movement. After that, I started noticing him at odd times. Walking slowly along the sidewalk in front of my house at 3 in the morning, crouching near fences during the day, standing at his window whenever I left for work, watching. Once, I pulled into my driveway late and caught him in the corner of my rearview mirror. He had paused mid-step, standing completely still, eyes fixed on my house. There was no reason for him to be there. I began to feel like every move I made was visible, tracked. Packages started disappearing. Small deliveries left on my porch vanished, even when I returned minutes after the doorbell rang. One day, a package I had been expecting arrived while I was out for lunch. When I came back, it was gone. I checked my cameras, which I had reluctantly installed after the first disappearance. The footage showed nothing unusual. No one on the porch, no motion, just a blur of a shadow near the side of the house that didn't register as human movement. I assumed I was imagining things, until it happened again. I began walking the street at night, trying to see patterns. Mr. K's house was the center of everything. I noticed a narrow gap in his side fence, perfectly aligned with the alley behind his house. The gate latch was worn, the paint scraped, as if someone passed through frequently. The ground beneath was flattened, darker, as though repeatedly trampled. I tried to dismiss it as maintenance or garden work, but the pattern made me uneasy. Each night, the faint light in his upstairs window would pulse on and off, always at the same time. I began timing it, noting every flicker, every step he took across the yard. One morning, I returned from work to find my side gate slightly ajar. I was meticulous about locking it. Nothing inside the yard had been moved, but the soil near the fence was disturbed. Small footprints, narrow and elongated, pressed into the dirt, leading from my yard to the alley behind Mr. K's property. I examined them closely. They weren't animal tracks. They were human, and they were recent. I felt my stomach tighten, a slow, creeping fear that I couldn't shake. I started recording every detail: lights, movements, strange sounds. At night, I could hear the faint scraping of shoes on concrete through the open windows. Once, I caught the sound of a door closing softly at the vacant lot next to him, a property owned by the city but never maintained. No one should have been there, yet something was moving within. I set up cameras facing my yard, capturing the alley, the side fence, even the curb. Weeks passed. I pieced together a pattern. Mr. K was leaving the house at odd hours, but the true intrusions happened at night when I slept. My packages, my small electronics, even minor items from the garage disappeared. The alley and vacant lot were the entry points. He had mapped the neighborhood, memorized routines, cameras, blind spots. Nothing was random. He was organized, deliberate, and careful. It culminated one night when I stayed up, hiding in the shadows of my living room. I had the cameras running on my phone. Around 2 in the morning, the front porch light flicked on. I froze, barely breathing, and watched. A shadow moved from his side fence to mine, crossing the narrow strip of grass. The figure paused at my gate, lifted the latch without touching it, slipped inside, and moved into the yard silently. I could see him clearly now, tall, thin, deliberate. He carried nothing but had full knowledge of the terrain. I watched my phone until he retreated, slipping back through the same gap in the fence. The next day, I called the police and handed over all the footage, timestamps, and observations. Officers arrived, examined the fences, the alley, and the vacant lot. They interviewed neighbors, checked property records, and returned the following week with search warrants. When they opened Mr. K's basement, they found a small network of hidden crawl spaces and storage areas. He had been using them to store stolen items, track neighborhood routines, and observe residents without detection. The meticulousness was staggering. Everything from packages to bicycles to spare keys had been cataloged and stored. He was arrested quietly, without commotion, and the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The vacant lot was fenced, the alley patrolled, and my property reinforced. I no longer saw Mr. K's silhouette at windows, nor did I hear footsteps at night. I installed permanent cameras and motion sensors, but the constant unease faded. Life returned to its quiet rhythm, but the knowledge that someone could observe so closely, for so long without anyone noticing, stayed with me. Every light, every shadow, every faint sound in the night became a reminder that safety is fragile, and the ordinary can hide danger in plain sight. I moved there because I thought gated meant safe. The listing photos showed a tall iron gate, trimmed hedges, clean sidewalks, and uniform houses that looked watched over. The rent was high enough to suggest standards. The lease paperwork used words like controlled access and private security. I had just left a rough apartment situation and wanted quiet. I wanted routine. I wanted to stop looking over my shoulder. The gate worked with a code and a windshield tag. Cameras sat on metal poles near the entrance. A small guard booth stood empty most days, window tinted, chair inside. Cars slowed as they entered, even when no one was watching. It felt organized, predictable. The houses sat close together, 2 stories, narrow driveways, small yards. Sound carried. Lawns were cut on schedule. Trash cans were aligned. People waved without stopping. Everyone seemed to know where they were supposed to be. The first strange thing happened 3 weeks after I moved in. I woke up and found my garage door open. Not wide, just enough to notice. Nothing was missing. My bike was still there, tools untouched, boxes stacked the same way. The door looked like it had been lifted carefully and lowered again. I checked the opener history. No record. I checked the camera inside the garage. It showed the door closing at night like always. Then nothing. The footage jumped to morning with the door already open. I reported it to the management office. They suggested I attend the neighborhood watch meeting. They framed it as community support. The meeting took place in a clubhouse near the pool. The room smelled like coffee and printer ink. Folding chairs formed a loose circle. A few men sat with notebooks. One woman typed on a laptop. A whiteboard leaned against the wall with dates and house numbers written in neat rows. They welcomed me with nods. They already knew my address. That stood out. I had not introduced myself yet. They explained that the watch existed to keep the neighborhood safe. They said it worked best when residents shared information. They spoke in calm tones, measured, confident. As the meeting continued, I realized they were not discussing crimes. They talked about patterns, schedules, changes in routine, which houses went dark early, which garages stayed closed during the day, which doors used keypads instead of locks. One man brought out a binder. Inside were printed spreadsheets, rows of addresses, columns labeled work hours, pets, visitors, cameras, alarms. Another man recited license plates from memory as examples of unfamiliar vehicles. The woman with the laptop updated entries as they spoke. When I tried to understand why this level of detail was needed, the energy in the room shifted. No one answered. Pens stopped moving. The air felt tight. The meeting ended soon after. I told myself they were just intense. Retired people with time. Overzealous volunteers. I did not go back. After that, small things started happening. My trash bin was moved a few feet from where I left it. My mail slot showed signs of being opened and closed without mail taken. My porch camera logged motion with no video attached. Just gaps. I noticed cars idling near my house longer than needed. Always different vehicles. Always residents. They looked forward, not at me. One night, I woke to the sound of a key turning in my lock. Slow. Careful. The deadbolt shifted halfway and stopped. I stayed still. My heart beat so hard I felt it in my throat. After a few seconds, the pressure eased. The sound stopped. In the morning, I checked the lock. No damage. No scratches. The keyhole was clean. I reported it to the watch captain. He visited my house that afternoon. He walked the perimeter. He checked my doors. He nodded. He told me not to call the police. He said it would cause problems. He said the gate logs showed no entry during the night. He said the system was accurate. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in the dark and watched the street through the blinds. Houses stood quiet. Lights turned off in the same order they always did. The gate camera light blinked at intervals. I started digging on my own. I requested gate logs through the management portal. They showed entries and exits by tag and code. I compared them to my own camera timestamps. There were gaps. Short windows where the gate logged maintenance mode. No entries recorded. No exits either. I learned that several watch members had administrative access to the gate system. It was justified as emergency response capability. They could open the gate remotely. They could disable logging during tests. I checked public records. One watch member had a background in data analysis. Another had worked private security. The captain had served on a zoning board years earlier. None of that was illegal. Together, it formed something else. I spoke with a neighbor 2 houses down. He avoided eye contact. His answers were short. He confirmed that the watch helped with issues. He suggested I cooperate. That word stuck with me. I installed a secondary lock inside my door. I placed a wedge under the handle at night. I stopped following my usual schedule. I left lights on in random rooms. I parked in different spots. The activity increased. My doorbell camera showed figures standing just outside the frame. Shoes visible. Shadows moving away when the light turned on. The footage was grainy, corrupted during upload. One afternoon, I returned home early and found my front door unlocked. Inside, nothing was missing. Everything felt slightly off. A chair angled differently. A window latch reset. On my kitchen counter sat a printed sheet. No header. Just my address and a list of notes. Updated work hours. Estimated sleep schedule. Lock types. Camera blind spots. I understood then. The watch was not about stopping crime. It was about control. They gathered data to decide who belonged and who did not. They tested access. They corrected behavior. The gate kept outsiders out. The watch handled the inside. I backed everything up. Logs. Footage. Screenshots. I sent copies to a friend outside the neighborhood. I scheduled a police appointment at a station across town. Before I could go, my access tag stopped working. The gate rejected it. I used the code. It worked once. The second time, it failed. My phone showed an email from management citing a violation review. That night, the key returned to my door. This time, it turned fully. The handle moved. The wedge held. Pressure pushed against it for several seconds, then stopped. I left before morning. I packed essentials and drove through the gate while it was open for a delivery truck. I did not look back. Weeks later, I learned the truth through a news report. A burglary ring had been operating inside multiple gated communities in the area. They targeted residents deemed low risk. The watch groups acted as intelligence cells. They shared data. They staged access tests. They avoided police by controlling reports and gate logs. Several arrests were made after an unrelated traffic stop led to a search of a laptop. My neighborhood was listed among others. The watch captain was named. The gates did not make the place safe. They made it closed. What happened inside stayed inside, until someone refused to cooperate. I rented the room because it was cheap and close to work. The house sat halfway down a street that sloped toward a wide storm drain system at the bottom of the hill. When I first visited, it was dry. The pavement showed old water stains, dark lines that traced where runoff traveled during heavy rain. The landlord mentioned drainage issues in passing, framed as an inconvenience, not a problem. The first storm came 3 days after I moved in. It started late in the evening. Steady rain that soaked into the street and ran downhill in shallow streams. With the windows cracked, the smell reached my room. It was sharp and metallic, like copper left in the rain, mixed with something animal. Wet fur, not rot, not sewage. Something alive that had been soaked too long. The smell filled the block. It clung to clothes. It stayed in the air even after the rain slowed. When the storm passed, it faded but did not disappear. Settled low, near the ground. I noticed the animals before I paid real attention to the smell. A neighbor's cat stopped crossing the street. It would sit on the curb and stare at the other side, tail twitching, then turn back. Another cat that used to sleep on a parked car disappeared. Birds gathered on nearby streets but avoided the power lines above ours. By evening, those lines stayed empty. At night, the street felt hollow. No movement. No small sounds. Even insects were quieter. The storms kept coming. Each time, the smell returned stronger. It rolled uphill like fog, coated the back of my throat. After rain, the storm drains gurgled longer than expected. Water drained slowly, as if something blocked the flow farther down. I walked the block during the day to understand the layout. Near the bottom of the hill sat an abandoned house. The windows were boarded. The yard was overgrown. Behind it, partly hidden by weeds and a leaning fence, was a wide drainage opening. Concrete walls, rusted grate pulled aside and never replaced. Rainwater funneled into it from several streets. The smell was strongest there. I stayed back at first. The opening was dark even at noon. Damp air flowed out of it. The concrete around the entrance was stained a dull green and brown. Claw marks scored the surface, overlapping and uneven, worn down by time and water. After another storm, curiosity pushed me closer. The rain had stopped an hour earlier, but water still rushed inside. The smell was heavy enough to make my eyes water. I crouched near the opening and waited for my senses to adjust. Something moved inside. It was not fast. It was not loud. There was no splash or scramble. The sound was controlled, deliberate, weight shifting against concrete. A slow drag followed by a pause, then another. The movement stayed just beyond the light. I did not see eyes. I did not see fur. I saw the waterline change as something displaced it. I saw debris shift without floating free. The sound traveled deeper, then closer again, like it was testing distance. I stepped back. The movement stopped. I did not return that night. I washed my shoes twice and still smelled metal. Over the next days, I watched the drain from across the street. At night, faint sounds carried uphill. Scraping, low-contact sounds against stone. No cries, no growls, just presence. The animals stayed away. A dog being walked by its owner refused to go downhill, pulled hard enough to choke itself. The owner dragged it past, irritated. The dog did not stop shaking until they reached the next block. I searched city records online. The storm system under our street dated back decades. Old maps showed maintenance tunnels, overflow chambers, and access points that were sealed after repeated flooding complaints. One note mentioned animal intrusion issues years earlier. No details. After the next heavy rain, I noticed fresh marks near the opening. Mud smeared along the concrete edge. Thick strands of hair caught on rusted metal. The hair was coarse and dark, matted with debris. It smelled like the street after rain. I followed the runoff trail uphill. Water carried traces of that smell all the way past my house. The source stayed the same. One night, the power went out during a storm. The street went dark. Without the hum of electricity, the sounds from below were clearer. Water rushing, concrete tapping, something shifting its weight again and again, as if pacing within limits. I did not sleep. 3 days later, city trucks arrived without warning. No posted notices, no letters. Workers wore protective gloves and thick boots. They fenced off the area behind the abandoned house and worked through the afternoon. A new steel grate was installed over the drainage opening, bolted deep into concrete. Additional barriers were added farther down the system. Trucks hauled away debris sealed in black plastic. No one explained anything. The workers left before sunset. The next rain came that night. The smell did not return. Water drained faster. The gurgling stopped sooner. The street smelled like wet asphalt and leaves. Nothing more. Over the following days, animals came back. Birds returned to the power lines, hesitant at first, then in full numbers. A cat crossed the street without stopping. Insects filled the air again at dusk. I thought it was over. A week later, I noticed something else. The abandoned house was no longer empty. The boards were still on the windows, but fresh tire tracks marked the dirt driveway. Lights glowed faintly inside at night. No one went in or out during the day. I checked city permits. A temporary use permit had been issued to the Public Works Department. The address matched the abandoned house. More research filled in the gaps. During routine inspection after flooding complaints, workers had found a buildup of animal remains deep in the storm system. Not dumped, dragged. Bones marked by pressure, not teeth. Hair embedded in concrete cracks far above normal water level. evidence of a large animal using the tunnels as territory. Feral hogs had been reported miles away months earlier, displaced by construction near a river basin. One had gone missing. Storm systems offered shelter, food, and isolation. Over time, it had learned the drainage routes, nested near warm runoff pipes, and claimed the lowest point of the system. The smell was a mix of rust, blood, and soaked fur trapped in stagnant water. The deliberate movement I heard matched the description. Hogs were intelligent. They adapted. They avoided light. They learned patterns. Animals avoided the street because they sensed what lived below. The city sealed the drain and installed barriers deeper underground. The abandoned house served as an access point during cleanup and monitoring. The animal was euthanized underground due to size and aggression, removed in sections to avoid further damage to the system. The street went back to normal. I moved out 2 months later. The room stayed cheap. No one mentioned the smell anymore. Sometimes, after heavy rain elsewhere in the city, I catch a hint of copper in the air and remember how something lived beneath us, moving slowly, learning the limits of concrete, waiting for water to carry what it needed downhill. Every neighbor knew the same man, but none of us knew him the same way. I did not understand that at first. To me, he was steady and polite, the kind of person who remembered names and asked questions that felt normal. He lived 3 houses down, kept his yard trimmed, waved every morning when I left for work. He never lingered. He never pushed. He fit into the background of the street so well that I stopped noticing him unless he was right there. The street itself was quiet. Modest houses, narrow driveways, trees planted at the same time that had grown unevenly over the years. Most people kept to themselves. We nodded. We waved. That was enough. I lived there with a roommate. We worked different hours and rarely crossed paths with neighbors at the same time. That mattered later. The man always seemed to be outside when I was. Not waiting, just present. Taking out trash, checking mail, watering plants. He never appeared at night. I never saw him when I came home late. Only during normal hours, when the street felt safe. I thought nothing of it. My roommate mentioned him once early on. Not in detail, just that he seemed off. Too intense. I brushed it off. People read things differently. That was my excuse. Over time, small inconsistencies appeared. Nothing dramatic. He would mention a detail about my routine that I did not remember sharing. My work schedule. The day trash pickup changed. Package delivery delay. Felt like attentiveness. Neighborly awareness. I accepted it. He never stepped inside our house. Never asked. He stayed on the sidewalk or near the curb. That distance made everything feel controlled. The family next door had 2 kids and kept to themselves. The man never interacted with them when I was around. He walked past their house without looking. I assumed they just did not talk. The blackout changed everything. It happened on a warm evening after a storm. The power went out across the block. No lights, no air movement. People stepped outside, drawn by the sudden quiet. That was the first time I saw multiple neighbors gathered at once. We stood in the street, scattered but close enough to talk. Phones lit faces. Someone mentioned the man. Just a comment about whether he had power or not. That was when the differences surfaced. My roommate said he had yelled at her once over parking, raised his voice, stepped too close. That shocked me. I had never seen anger from him, not even irritation. The family next door said he never spoke to them at all. No wave, no nod, just watched from his porch when their kids played, then went inside when they noticed. Another neighbor said he was overly helpful, offered to fix things without being asked, showed up at odd times with tools, stayed too long. As we compared details, a pattern formed. He was not inconsistent by accident. He was precise. He adjusted himself based on who was in front of him. Tone, posture, distance, even facial expression. The version of him I knew would not have raised his voice. The version my roommate knew would not have smiled. That realization settled over the group slowly. No one laughed it off. No one defended him. The blackout left us exposed in more ways than one. The power came back. People drifted home. Doors closed. The street returned to normal, but something underneath had shifted. After that night, I paid closer attention. I noticed how he checked windows before approaching a house, how he changed pace depending on who else was outside, how he ended interactions cleanly, never awkwardly, never leaving loose ends. I realized he was collecting reactions. My roommate became more uneasy. She altered her schedule, avoided being outside alone. He stopped acknowledging her entirely. No eye contact, no wave. It was like she had been removed from his awareness. That scared me more than hostility would have. I started documenting things. Times I saw him, what he did, who else was present. The notes felt excessive until they did not. Then came the incident with the package. A delivery went missing from our porch. Nothing expensive, just a small box. Later that evening, it reappeared, placed neatly against the door. No damage, no explanation. My camera showed nothing. The timestamp jumped. I stopped assuming coincidence. A week later, police cars lined the street early in the morning. Not flashing lights, just presence. Calm and deliberate. Officers went door to door, asking quiet questions. When they reached our house, they asked about the man. That was when I learned the full scope. Someone had finally reported him. Not for something dramatic, for pattern behavior, following, logging, repeated boundary testing. Enough small reports added up. The police searched his house that afternoon. What they found was not hidden behind false walls or locked safes. It was organized in plain sight. Notebooks, shelves of them, 1 page per household. Names, addresses, sketches of front yards, notes about routines, work hours, sleep patterns, preferred interactions, stress responses, what made people uncomfortable, what put them at ease. There were annotations about tone choices, distance thresholds, eye contact tolerance, which neighbors reacted better to friendliness and which responded to authority. He had written about me, accurate details, my habits, my blind spots, the way I responded to casual conversation, the fact that I dismissed early discomfort. Reading that made my stomach turn. He had not been improvising. He had been rehearsing. The police said he showed no signs of delusion, no break from reality. He understood exactly what he was doing. He framed it as observation, social study, harmless interest. The notebooks proved otherwise. He had tracked escalation potential, isolation markers, vulnerability windows. He was arrested without resistance. After he was gone, the street felt louder. People spoke more openly. Neighbors shared stories they had never told because they did not want to seem dramatic. The picture filled in. No single interaction had been enough to justify fear. That was the point. I moved a few months later, not because I was afraid he would come back, because I no longer trusted how easily I had accepted him. The scariest part was not the notebooks. It was how natural he had felt, how easily he blended, how little effort it took for him to become exactly what each of us expected to see. I still think about how many versions of him existed at the same time, walking the same street, never overlapping, never contradicting each other until the lights went out and we finally stood together long enough to compare notes. I moved into the neighborhood in early October, after a breakup and a job transfer that landed me in a quiet edge-of-town subdivision built in the late 90s. The houses were close enough to hear garage doors, but far enough apart to feel private. Lawns were trimmed the same way. Mailboxes matched. The street curved gently and ended in a cul-de-sac with a small concrete island where kids used to ride bikes. I noticed the absence of kids right away. Most driveways held 2 cars, sometimes 3, but I never saw anyone play outside. Everything felt paused, like a photo taken years ago and never updated. My routine settled quickly. I left for work before sunrise and came back after dark. The streetlights came on in a staggered line at dusk, each one humming softly, each one casting a cone of dull orange that barely reached the sidewalk. The house across from mine had a motion light that snapped on at odd hours, even when no car passed. I assumed raccoons. The house next to mine was empty, a pale blue with blinds drawn tight. A realtor sign leaned crooked near the curb. The phone number sun-faded and unreadable. The first odd thing I noticed was the cars. Not the cars themselves, but how they shifted. A white sedan would be parked 2 houses down on Monday, then across the street on Tuesday, then gone on Wednesday, then back on Thursday in a different spot. A dark SUV with a dented rear panel appeared only on weekends and always left before dawn on Monday. I told myself people had schedules, visitors, shared vehicles. Still, the pattern stuck in my head because it never lined up with anyone I saw. Packages began to disappear. Mine went missing twice in 1 month. The first time, I blamed delivery errors. The second time, I tracked the delivery timestamp and got home within an hour. The box was gone. I checked nearby porches as I walked the block, trying not to look obvious. Some houses had cameras. Some had nothing. No one came out. No doors opened. The street absorbed my footsteps and gave nothing back. I installed a door camera after that. I also started paying attention to the vacant house next door. Its lawn was cut regularly, even though no one lived there. The grass never grew uneven. The leaves were cleared after storms. At night, a faint light glowed through the gaps in the blinds. Not steady, more like a TV left on low brightness. I assumed a caretaker stopped by or a realtor checked in. Still, it felt wrong to see light in a place no one occupied. One night, around 3 in the morning, I woke to a sound that didn't fit. It wasn't loud. It was a scraping, measured and careful, like plastic dragged across concrete. I lay still and listened. Came again, closer, then stopped. My bedroom window faced the side yard between my house and the vacant one. I got up and peered through the slats of my blinds. The gap was narrow. The ground looked darker than usual, as if something blocked the streetlight. The sound didn't return. Over the next weeks, small things accumulated. The trash bins on my street were sometimes turned slightly, lids not fully closed. The mail carrier's bundles looked thinner, rubber bands stretched around less paper. A potted plant on my porch shifted position. My door camera recorded motion without showing anyone. The clips showed the same empty frame with a faint blur at the edge, like a sleeve passing too close to the lens. I started walking the neighborhood after work, slow laps that took me past each house. I noticed how many blinds stayed closed at all hours. I noticed which porch lights stayed on during the day and which never turned on at night. I noticed a gap under the fence behind the vacant house that led to the alley. The grass there was worn flat, as if feet passed through often. The alley itself ran behind the cul-de-sac, a service lane used for trash pickup. I had never walked it before. When I did, I found scuffed concrete near the vacant house's gate and a smear of grease on the latch. The night the pattern broke was cold and clear. I came home later than usual and parked on the street. As I walked toward my door, the motion light across the street snapped on, then the one beside it, then mine. The sequence felt triggered, not random. I unlocked my door and stepped inside without turning on lights. I stood in the dark and watched the door camera feed on my phone. The street sat still. Then, from the corner of the frame, a shape slid into view. It wasn't a face. It was the edge of a body pressed flat against my siding, moving sideways to avoid the lens. The motion detection didn't flag it. The person knew the camera's angle. I waited until the shape passed and then checked the clip frame by frame. I saw fabric texture, a seam, a glove. I saw the outline of a backpack. I saw a shoe toe lift and set down without sound. The timestamp put it at 2 minutes before I arrived. Whoever it was had been there, close enough to touch my door, then melted away. I slept with lights on after that. I also installed another camera, this one aimed at the side yard. It recorded at night in grainy grayscale. The first few nights showed nothing. On the 4th night, it caught movement near the fence. A panel slid back just enough to create a narrow opening. A body slipped through, careful not to brush leaves. The person paused, listened, then moved toward the vacant house. The gate opened without noise. The figure disappeared inside. I watched more clips. The pattern emerged fast once I knew where to look. The person used the vacant house as a base. They entered through the back gate, never the front. They came and went at hours when most people slept. They carried small items out and larger bags in. Sometimes they left with nothing, just a slow patrol of the block, hugging shadows, avoiding cameras by pressing close to walls or passing beneath porch overhangs. I called the non-emergency line and submitted footage. I did not expect much. Still, 2 unmarked cars showed up a week later, parked down the block at different times, never together. The patrols increased. The figure adjusted. They skipped nights. They changed routes. They started using the alley more, staying low and fast. One night, they didn't leave. The following afternoon, a crew arrived at the vacant house. They wore plain clothes and gloves. They went straight to the basement. I watched from my window as they carried out bags, then boxes, then electronics wrapped in towels. A technician set up lights and photographed marks on the floor near the foundation wall. Later, a uniformed officer taped a notice to the front door. What they found explained everything. The basement had been modified. A crawl space connected to the sewer easement had been widened and reinforced. From there, narrow paths led under fences and up into side yards through loose panels. The person had lived in the basement for months, maybe longer, using the house because it was listed but not monitored. They tapped power through an extension line run under the siding. They learned the street by watching from the windows at night, mapping lights, routines, camera angles. They took packages, mail, small tools, spare keys left in planters, anything that could be used later. The cars that shifted belonged to them and to people they stole from, moved to avoid reports and patterns. The arrest came quietly. No sirens. No crowd. The neighborhood did not gather. By the next week, the vacant house had new locks and fresh boards over the basement windows. The alley gate was replaced. The worn grass was reseeded. A truck came and went, hauling away debris. Life resumed its paused state. I still live there. The street feels louder now, though nothing changed. I see people check their porches more often. Lights stay on. Cameras multiply. At night, I close my blinds and watch the live feed. Not because I expect to see anything, but because I know how close the quiet can get.